All right. Well, what an amazing evening so far. I know you have been, like me, inspired, challenged by everything that Phil and Diane and Brooke and Elizabeth have shared. I am so looking forward to the future of this ministry. Hey, before we're done, I have someone else that I need to introduce you to. I'm so excited about this. He's uniquely qualified to talk about Phil and Diane as parents, because he happens to be their firstborn son. You, of course, know him. John Mark is the founding pastor of Bridgetown Church. He's also recently just launched Practicing the Way, which I think will go down in history as one of the most influential prophetic movements of our generation. We're already implementing a lot of those resources at Riverbend, the church where I pastor. I'm so incredibly grateful for you. Also grateful that when you meet a hero, he turns out to be a really incredible guy, which he is, as many of you know. So would you guys please join me in welcoming John Mark Comer, everyone. Yeah, of course.
Thanks, my friend. Good evening, everybody. Wow. I was already thinking just what you are dying for right now, a fourth sermon. And thank you for that loving confirmation right there. I have so much to say. You know, I just want to start by saying you're welcome, because every single thing they have to teach you, they learned on me. So you're welcome. No. In all seriousness, this will not take very long. I just moved recently, or relocated to California a few weeks ago with my family, where our family is originally from, and my wife's family as well. But we spent the last 20 years here in the Pacific Northwest, and Portland, as you all know, we spent the last 10 years in the urban core of the city. It is in a very bad way. That's no secret. But the genesis of Portland's crisis started quite a while ago. I think a decade ago now. Outreach magazine called Portland the post-Christian frontier. And while Portland is not the future of the secular West, it is a future for a large and growing slice of the pie chart that is America and the Western world as a whole, and increasingly the global world due to the internet. As our nation becomes more, or our city becomes, and our nation becomes increasingly secular and socially progressive and more hostile to the way of Jesus. And I've been living through that in my lifetime, where the way of Jesus was weird when I was a kid, and now it is dangerous and evil and immoral and bigoted in the eyes of the world around us. And Portland is certainly one of the most difficult places to follow Jesus, at least in our country. But there is very much a silver lining to living and working here. Living in a city with such antipathy toward the gospel has a way of forcing you to face reality. T.S. Eliot famously said, "Humankind cannot bear too much reality." This is especially true of Christians in our rapidly secularizing culture, especially Christians in parts of the country that are more suburban or conservative and a bit behind, and I mean that in the positive sense of the word, on the secularization gradient. For those of us who love Jesus and his kingdom and care about the future of the church and the people of God, it is a pain in our heart. I resonate with Jesus weeping over the city of Jerusalem. If you had only known what would have made for your peace, but you did not recognize the time of your visitation. And a lot of us would prefer to just close our eyes and hope that it all goes away. But living in a city like Portland, and increasingly any city in America or anywhere with Wi-Fi, you can't do that. The reality is the state of the church in America is not good. It is an open secret that we are living through a crisis of discipleship. The Barna Research Group, which has done the most in-depth and wide-ranging survey of millennial spirituality to date, concluded that only 8% of millennials brought up in the church in America are what they call resilient disciples. That word was used. Now that sounds way cooler than it actually is. By resilient disciples, they do not mean like the emerging Francis Chans of a generation. They are just beautifully ordinary disciples of Jesus. They are what the late John Stott called basic Christians, meaning by the data, they go to church on a semi-regular basis, they read their Bible and pray, and they live by general New Testament ethics. Friends and family, 8% is not a good number. After growing up inside of evangelicalism and reading widely and learning history and traveling, I have come to this opinion, and I could be wildly off, but I don't think so. My opinion is this is not a bug in evangelicalism, it is a feature. There's a saying in the business world, your system is perfectly designed to give you the results you are getting. Normally that is applied to a widget factory, or the bottom of an Excel spreadsheet. But I find it a fascinating wisdom principle to apply to discipleship in the church in America. Arguably, when you have a number like 8%, that's not like tweak the system. That's like throw it in the garbage and start over, because it's pretty hard to get worse than 8%. Something about the system of the Church of America, and specifically evangelicalism, is, I would argue, giving us the very crisis we are all weeping over. How did we get here? Well, nobody really knows. All we know is that in the great game of Clue, the murder mystery of secularism in the West and the death of Christendom, surely one of the culprits was the church herself. And I say that not to lambast or to critique, but to speak honestly about the moment that we're in. In my view, and this could be anachronistic, so forgive me, but since at least World War II in North America and far beyond, the gospel has been preached in such a way that you could become a Christian without becoming a disciple of Jesus. A foreign idea to Jesus himself, the writers of the New Testament, and pretty much all of church history. We have separated Jesus' twofold call to make disciples, both baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and I'm quoting Matthew here, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. Of course, this raises the question, what exactly are we baptizing people into? Is it the kingdom of Jesus, or is it just a Christianized version of the left or the right, or you fill in the blank? But this ripping apart of what we would call evangelism and discipleship, and then to add insult to injury, the demotion of discipleship to an optional secondary phase in your spiritual journey, has tragically created a two-tier church where we have this wide band of, quote, Christians, a word rarely used in the New Testament, who have a nominal faith that is honestly just a syncretism, much like ancient Israel in the Old Testament, of the way of Jesus and the left or the right, who tend to be consumer-oriented, whose primary reference point for spirituality is the self-life, not the self-death. Then you have a minority who are actually following Jesus and living as disciples or apprentices of Jesus the Rabbi. As you know, even in our, quote, post-Christian culture, something like 70% of Americans still identify as Christians. Of course, not in a city like Portland, but in the nation as a whole. But a number of independent surveys put the number of Americans who are actually following Jesus, again, not the next Francis Chan or Mother Teresa, but just basic Christians, at, wait for it, right at 8%. All of which brings me back to Dallas Willard, which if you've not sat through one of my sermons in a while, you were about due for a quote. The greatest issue facing the world today, he writes. Just think about the greatest issue facing the world today. How would you finish that sentence? Think about it for a moment. With all its heartbreaking needs is, here's his conclusion, whether those who are identified as Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom of the heavens into every corner of human existence. Willard used to say that there is no problem for which discipleship to Jesus is not the ultimate solution. Name your problem of choice. Global warming, economic inequality, political policy, secularism, the breakdown of the family, the crisis of fatherlessness, postmodern gender theory, systemic racism, you fill in the blank. Whatever pressing issue you most care about, that you give to alleviate and you work and strategize and pray to see change, whatever it is, if you trace it back far enough, the ultimate solution to every single case study is discipleship to Jesus. Can you imagine what would happen if people were to approach all of these issues with the driving aim of doing what Jesus would do if he were them? The Barna Group that I mentioned before, in their research, sadly came to this conclusion. And they could be wrong. This is not word from heaven. This is just their conclusion of the data. Christianity in the U.S. has reached the point of irreversible decline. The only hope, in the conclusion on their data, to arrest that decline is two things. One, a sweeping move of the Spirit of God across our nation. And two, what they call radical youth discipleship. meaning pouring everything you have into the emerging generation, say 14 or 15 and below. Now, one way to do that is through a renaissance of work around discipleship and formation. That is the work that I'm giving and intend to give the second half of my life to. But by the time someone is old enough for the work that I do and the work that this new organization I'm starting is about, for many people it is far too late. That window of opportunity has closed. Lord, have mercy. But if parents were to take up their God-given call to raise passionate Jesus followers, not to raise Christians, but to raise disciples, there would be no need for the organization that I'm in the process of starting, and I could go take a proper sabbatical. Honestly, much of what I'm doing is teaching well-educated, sophisticated millennials in secular contexts what they should have been taught by their parents as little kids. In particular, all the things like practices, if you're at all familiar with my work, and I don't expect that by any means, they are better caught than taught. And I was taught most of them, or I caught most of them in my family of origin. I never needed a Sabbath practice that I just had to raise a bunch of money to go off and do because, well, Sabbath, that language was not used by my family of origin. And in many ways, that practice was not an integral part. But every Saturday night, I still remember sitting around. There was no movies allowed on Saturday night because the next day was the Lord's Day. We'd have family devotions, and we'd get our allowance, which now in hindsight was criminal and how small it was. And then they would pass out. It was $1 for every year of your life. So, at 10 years old, it was $10 a month, not a week, a month, right? And so you'd get that, you'd get your $10, and then there'd be the envelope. This is way old school. This is way before apps and phones and Wi-Fi. And we had the envelope, and then you'd calculate the 10%, and you'd take that dollar, and in tears, you would put that dollar, not because you had a cheerful, joyful heart, but because your dad made you. And you would give that to and the next, but the point was, I was habituated into that before I even knew it was happening. I did not need a practice on scripture, one of the things I'm working on right now, because my family had the no Bible, no breakfast rule. And I still don't know if that was good parenting or spiritual abuse. But I know that I wake up every single morning and read my Bible. So does Rebecca, so does Elizabeth, and we're all praying for Matthew. So thank you very much. The point is, in my view, there is nothing more important in our time, and arguably in all times, than discipleship to Jesus, by which I mean the formation of the human soul and the community of Jesus into people of love as God the Trinity is. I mean, think about, what is God doing in the world right now? You ever thought about that? It's such a simple answer. What God is doing in the world today, and has been doing for the last however many thousands of years, is forming a community, a new humanity of Jew and Gentile, a family not based on blood or ethnicity or political affiliation or nation-state citizenry, but on allegiance to Jesus as Lord, a new multi-ethnic people of God from every tribe and tongue and nation around the table, doing life together around the bread and the wine. And through their shared discipleship to Jesus, he is forming them and you and me into people who are pervaded by love, as defined by Jesus, and wisdom and power in order to one day co-rule with Jesus over the cosmos upon his return to make all things new. If this reading of what God is doing, if this reading of human history, past, present, and future, is even close to the mark, then that makes the formation of the human soul and the community of Jesus at the very center of what God is on about in the world. And I can't think of a better example of Henry Blackaby's axiom: find where God is working and join him there. There are a few ways that I know of to do that. Of course, the first is to do that work yourself, to get involved in the work of discipleship and formation, in particular with young people and working with children or teenagers or students and building communities for people. The second is to become a gospel patron. It's language from John Reinhardt's book. He argues that behind every great move of God in church history is a group of what he calls gospel patrons, men and women of means who gave sacrificially to fund the work of the kingdom. You see this, of course, in the life of Jesus, whose entire ministry was funded by a small group of wealthy women. Come on. You see it in Paul, whose ministry was funded by a mix of his own artisanal craft and the financial support of a few cultural elites and some small church plants. You see it all through church history. Many of you in the room, I'm guessing, have means. You likely have far more than you need, as I do. That is a genuine problem for us as disciples of Jesus. Just to clarify, Jesus, have you read him lately? Have you read him ever? Have you ever kept count of how many of his teachings are about money and wealth and possessions and stewardship? Let me fill you in the question that you're not asking and don't want to know the answer to if you're smart. The percentage is 25%. You and I will stand before God at the end of days, and we will give an account. Notice the financial language used by the New Testament writers. We will give an account for how we stewarded resources that I think are mine to steward, but biblically and theologically are his. I'm the steward. I'm the money manager. I'm not the owner of the business. I'm the one who's been discharged with these resources, as are you. What Jesus called our talents, not the English word talent as in America's Got Talent, it doesn't, but the first century Jewish word talent as in a currency or a sum of money. One way that you can steward your resources well before God, and all we have as God's to begin with, is by becoming a gospel patron. Becoming one of those people, like the women that followed Jesus around, like the men and the sisters behind Paul. Becoming one of those people who is behind the work of God, funding the work of God in our time. In just a few moments, I'm guessing you will have a chance to do just that, as will I. And more importantly, the third way is to prioritize your own parents. My parents were not perfect, and I could tell you stories, but they were really good parents. And now as a parent myself, any judgment that was in my heart, there wasn't much, it has been wiped clean by consistent failure on my own part, far worse than anything I could ever hold against them. And one striking thing about their life, and I think Brooke and Elizabeth were saying this a minute ago, is they genuinely prioritized raising us 4 kids over ministry, career, money, hobbies, vacation, any of that. Matt and I, Matt there in the back room, have been chatting about this bizarre experience as 40-something-year-old men who, right as we're coming into kind of the peak of our vocational powers, right when we have the most chance to be successful by whatever that definition or whatever metric you would choose, to make the most money or to have the most accomplishment or whatever it is right at the same time when our children need the most from us. And if we are faithful to God's call in our life, I have the least availability to work right now that I have ever had in my entire life. And every single day, I face the temptation to prioritize my work. And for a pastor, it's so easy because you can say I'm doing the work of God. And that is a word I can't say from stage because it is often not the work of God. It's the work of your own empire building. Or to prioritize the genuine stewardship of the children before you. And we kids, and I'm speaking here for Brooke and Elizabeth and Matt and Simo and Steve and Bex, we are nowhere close to grateful enough. The great pain of parenting that I'm just starting to realize is coming toward me, and it wasn't even on my radar. It's like more pain coming, really? I have 3 teenagers right now. For 5 more years till they're gone. Not that I'm counting at all. But the great pain is you pour out everything you have. And then your kids, and I say this in faith, move out of the home and you know those parents that grieve when that happens? I don't think I'm going to be one of those parents. Great respect, but we'll see what happens. Your kids move out and get sucked into the busyness of life and the entitlement of the human heart and never thank you. Not properly. Sure, I thank you here or there, sure, a card, but not proper honor. This must be how God feels all the time. To give and to give and to give and to give. Children who often want nothing to do with him or barely acknowledge his goodness or treat it like nothing and don't steward it because they're busy with their life. in feeling that pain, in particular some of you older parents in the room, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. We are participating in the sufferings of Christ and joining him in bringing healing to the world. And mom and dad, just because I have the mic, and who cares, it's so long at this point, I just want to say I have been cut to the heart in recent weeks as I have just been convicted, just as I'm parenting my own beautiful children, whom in all seriousness I love, and I know that part of me will be very sad when they move out. And the other part of me is maybe has a bottle of wine that I've already bought to save for 5 years for that specific night. So I'm sure it will be a complex emotional experience. But I have been cut to the heart by just how little gratitude I have shown you for all of your pain, sacrifice, generosity, and patience. And I would imagine all of those sleepless nights that now I am living through with a teenager. Thank you. Mom, just a few days ago, I was recording a podcast on prayer, and we were doing an episode on hearing God's voice, which for many people is a very new experience. And I just started thinking about, I'm obsessed with the monastic tradition and Eastern Orthodox, all these things, and kind of ancient global Christianity. And so I didn't grow up hearing about contemplative prayer, Lectio Divina, or many of the things that I care about deeply now. But I grew up with a mom and a dad who were following Jesus. And I don't think I ever remember a morning when I would wake up, no matter how early I woke up, you were always the first one up. And coming down the stairs, and there were you in that hideous 90s hunter green colored armchair. Hunter green is actually kind of back though, now that I think about it. But you have to put it with gold, and it has to be like Spanish modern kind of, then it's cool. But it wasn't cool for quite a while. But there you were in your chair, and most of you know that she went deaf the moment that she had me. She started losing her hearing, and I don't know if that was trauma or wisdom. Either way, it was quite sad. But you could sneak up on her quite easily if you were a little boy and facetious, because she couldn't hear you at all. And so I remember often I'd walk into that room, even as a loud teenager, and you wouldn't hear me, but you'd be there. And I remember you were always kind of Bible open in your lap. And I would see you kind of staring off into the distance, and your eyes were just kind of unfocused. And I began to realize you weren't distracted. You were listening, and you were hearing, and you were experiencing God in a way that imprinted on me in ways that I'm just now beginning to realize. And to watch your transformation, not that you were bad news or anything, you're a wonderful mother, but I have seen a profound transformation in you over these years. And the mom that I know now is so different from the mom that I remember as a child. And that gives me so much hope. Gives me so much hope for all the failures and foibles I have with my own kids, that when they're my age, and God forbid somebody should ever give them a microphone, that maybe they won't hate me all that much. Maybe they would even love me. And it gives me so much hope that maybe even I could change and grow and mature and heal. So I just want to say thank you, and I honor you. These guys are the real deal. And I could tell you all the bad stuff, but it wouldn't take very long, and it'd mostly just be really funny. But I won't do that. I just want to honor you. I have a heritage of faith that is an invaluable treasure. I stand on the shoulders of giants. The work that I get to do, which is such an honor, I never could have done without an entire lifespan of my mom and dad before me. And I thank you. And friends, we want to give that same heritage to as many people as we possibly can. Thank you very much.